My name is Emmanuel. Uh, I work at a HSC. I support scholarship students with starting give back projects. Some of them are entrepreneurship projects. And I also do workshop facilitation for Design Thinking Ghana Hub. And as you might have probably gotten the hint, I actually have a lot of passion for agriculture, and I'm hoping to explore how to build sustainable food systems with design thinking. So this session is not about us giving and you receiving. Actually, this session is a platform for us to discuss and learn from each other, because someone like Daniel, from your introduction, I'm very sure that you have more practical experience than any of us on this call. So we'll be putting you on the spot very often. But yeah, welcome to everybody, and we hope you are comfortable enough for us to get this started. So as I mentioned, get ready to do a lot of discussion, but by the time we finish the session, we are hoping to look at this from a very practical perspective, try and understand what food systems are. And for the design thinking part, our focus will be on how to overcome what is called innovation myopia. And then my favorite item on the bill is that hopefully we'll be able to discuss some things that we can leave this call and go and practice in order to contribute to the space that we are discussing. Design thinking in sustainable food systems. Let's start with things that are happening, correct? So right now in Ghana, I'm sure all of us, those who are in Ghana, and even if you're not in Ghana, you probably have been following the news. We are all in the adulthood stage. So we are probably paying for something, or paying, either we are paying directly for it or we are paying someone to do something for us. So we understand how the economy is. But particularly for food, we have seen a terrible increase in the prices of food. Some of them are in short supply, but particularly this headline, we are in the month of June right now. So according to this headline, between June and August, about 1 million Ghanaians are facing some form of food insecurity. That is anywhere between acute hunger. Can you mute the person for me? Thank you. So 1 million people are going through either acute form of hunger or some malnutrition or anything that falls in between. And if you are thinking of how many 1 million people are, just picture Baba Yara Sports Stadium filled with a lot of Ghanaians that went to watch a recent match, Black Stars recent match. That was about 40,000 people. If you multiply that by 20,000, you still wouldn't get 1 million people. And that shows the magnitude of the issue that we are talking about. And in all sense, I think it warrants us to start talking about what we can do, regardless of our profession or where we are working or whatever we are doing, to try and avert some of these challenges that we are facing in our current food system. So the discussion has started. Looking at some of the headlines you saw and some of your, first-hand exposures to what are some of the things that are happening, we want to hear from you. You can type this in the chat or you can unmute and talk. But what do you think are some of the causes, and if you have any ideas as to how we can mitigate them? Just to start off the conversation, anybody?
Okay, thank you. So I've been working with the agri design value chain sector, especially the middle belt, for the past 8 years. And as I'm talking now, some of the mango farmers and tomato farmers, they have been facing over the decade, they have been facing the issue of inadequate market losses. So it's as a result of post-harvest and inadequate market.
Right. So even if we stick to these two, I'm sure I'm unable to read the comment section. So if you're able to read that, you can share some of them as well. But just sticking to these two, Brian is talking about logistics aspect, fuel prices. We have Daniel also sharing things from the ground, post-harvest losses, among other things.
Yeah,
Um,
Theresa also wrote that there's poor road network in Ghana that's affecting.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, just to sort of put all this in broader perspective, this article that was published sometime last year sums it all up. Basically, saying that our current food system is broken. And the irony inherent in this is that you remember what Akufo-Addo said some time ago, that um, Ghana, we are sitting on money, but we are hungry. Yet it's so comedy. But this time around, the world in general appears to be sitting on food itself, but hungry. Because whereas some people are going hungry, we have a lot of food that is going waste in that part of the world. Clearly, this is a sign that something is wrong somewhere. And the paradox attached to this is also something very interesting, because it looks like the world has really advanced. We have the technology, we are wealthier than before, we have the people, the population and everything to solve major problems such as this one. But this conversation has prolonged and persisted for years, and it doesn't look like we are heading we are heading to the finishing line anytime soon. So it means we probably have to start looking at how we can change our approach to this problem. And I think this is what this conversation will probably help us to uncover as we continue. So to take this forward, I would like to invite my co-host, Ifwa, to talk us through what food system actually means. And just a brief background, she mentioned she did anthropology for her master's, so she's going to take us to a bit of history as well. So Ifwa, over to you.
Right, thanks so much, Derry. Thank you for warming up the audience. And before we begin, I'd just like to know what people think food systems are about. If you can, like, type in the chat or just like turn on your mic and just tell me what you think food systems refer to.
Um, do with food systems is like the ecosystem that surrounds the production of food. So I'm presuming all the way from the farmers to production to getting to final consumers and sort of that whole cycle.
Yeah, thanks for contributing, Brian. You're actually right. Well, I understand why there's a bit of silence, to be honest. Initially, when I stumbled on the topic, I was like, what's our food systems exactly? It seems like a mouthful, but you don't necessarily really understand what it means. Thank you, Daniel, for contributing as well. So just to simplify things, food systems, just like Brian said, actually is the ecosystem of how food is produced and marketed to people. It involves like the complex web of activities, which are like production, processing, transport, and consumption of food. So it's as simple as we think, but yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Am I, Nade, can you hear me now? Am I audible enough?
Yeah, it's just a bit quiet. It feels like you're far away from your microphone. So if you could, I don't know, but I can try and manage as well.
Oh,
Maybe it's just
sorry.
me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just give me
Thank
like
you.
2 minutes. I'm sorry, I'm coming.
Sure, no problem. So as we were discussing, basically food systems, it's almost like when we were in basic school and we learned of the human the biological system of things. Basically, it's a component of things that have come together to, provide the food that we eat. And not, it doesn't end with just consumption. It covers everything that has to do with that process. So, like Brian mentioned, what goes into production, after production, what happens afterwards, the distribution, the processing, the storage, and everything, including things that are even out of human control, like climate, the weather, water, and all those things that go into the things that we we would call food production and food consumption. And one thing that people usually leave out when we talk about food system is almost like we talk about all the things, but forget the people who do the production and then the consumption. Because at the end of the day, we are the people who matter most, and then we are the ones supposed to be at the center of all the discussion. I think if is back, so if over to you.
Yep. Thank you so much for helping out, Derry. Once we are familiar with what food systems actually mean, I'm just going to run through the history of food systems from like maybe the beginning of human. Okay. Yep. Okay, great. All right. So actually, historically, food systems have been like susceptible to changes in society. Food has always been the one product that has been malleable based on what's happening in different societies. And so I'm going to run through some of the drivers of these changes, and beginning with the emergence of city-states and urbanization. Yeah. Okay. So research reveals to me that a lot of people kind of migrated, especially from the 1900s, into like cities based on modernization and industrialization, which led them to areas where there's more settlement and there's more activities going on. This actually forced the governments to kind of increase the quantities and qualities of food that was being produced, but not necessarily focusing on the quality, but more of quantity. So a lot of people kind of adopted the innovative storage methods of food that we know, like refrigeration and drying and freezing. Although most of these, for example, drying was known maybe in the 1800s, getting closer to the 1950s and the early 2000s, that became more popular given that a lot of people were concentrated in the cities. And then finally, within the Middle Ages, you saw there was like a larger number of production and cultivation of food. Even though it was considered a lower class job, a lot of people were interested in that field because there was a mass number of unemployment. A lot of people were interested in trying to get a way around it to feed their families and kind of live in this big city life. Next slide, please. Right. And so, like I mentioned, the presence of refrigeration introduces science and technology into like the food system space. Major changes in food processing and preservation and transportation, based on the fact that now a lot of machinery was used, a lot of technology was used in how to refine food. And so now we talk about the canning of food and then creating the ultra processed foods, as we know. That became more and more frequent after the 1950s, more into the early 2000s and 2010s. Now we see it's even more popular to have a lot of more processed foods than we eat the naturally harvested foods. And then, based on the introduction of science and technology, we saw that there was also the presence of like animal breeding and a mass number of planting and harvesting in agriculture, which made things easier, especially for farmers and those within the animal production space as well. Next slide, please. Right. I heard that in the beginning, I think it was Matthew who mentioned war. Yes, so war actually does affect our food system space in a very broad way. So colonization and war are the major political influences that food system has had over time. We saw that food systems economies based on colonization, certain countries were known for mass production of certain products, as we see here. Maize was from Mexico, rice is from China, wheat and barley from the Middle East. But in current spaces in recent times, we see that various different countries are also shipping and producing these same products. So it's not necessarily a staple food for those countries anymore, but it was previously how those countries were recognized in the food production space. And then we talk about the Second World War, which also highly influenced food shortages and economic crisis and disease spread, based on the fact that like most countries were going to war. there was a limited number of transports of food, there was hunger, there was, Great Depressions all around. Yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, so now there's a shift from supply-driven to demand-driven societies. Until the 20th century, countries that exceeded domestic demand used export markets and food aid programs. So this basically means that, as I mentioned in the first or second slide, there was the introduction of urbanization. Urbanization led to more demand for certain food products, which led to a kind of demand and supply issue. But as we see in recent times, from maybe the 2010s to current, we see that people have preferences for the kind of food that they want, not necessarily all kinds of food are desired and preferred. So modern supply chains are pressing farmers to concentrate on some fewer crops in Ghana specifically, within the agricultural space in Ghana. So others are also recommending that we kind of shift away from the mass production of yam and potatoes and things of that sort to kind of that are less desired. For example, using sweet potatoes instead of yam and cocoyam, using paposhito instead of the highly desired habano peppers. Okay, is the next slide? Right. So basically, all in all, this is the history of food systems over time. We see that every country in the world produces some of its own food and trades food. As a result of these, constant changes in food systems are increasing complexities and adding to the challenge of assuring food safety globally. So to kind of discuss how we can curb this or assist this, we're now looking into design thinking, sustainable opportunities within the food system and how this can change over time. Derry, over to you.
Thank you so much, our dearest anthropologists. Yes, so just to sort of put everything that Ifo has told us into some visual frame, this is a graphical representation of what the food system actually is. And I have a very quick question. Just answer to yourself. What do you think about this? Do you think this is a simple thing just based on this picture? I'm sure the answer is no, because we are talking about something that revolves around humans that, I mean, from all sides, we understand that humans are highly unpredictable. Beyond that, we're also looking at a very complex value chain system that spans production to consumption. We are looking at social elements from organization to policies, and we're also looking at natural elements that most often are out of human control. So certainly, this is a breeding ground, a very, very fertile ground for what everybody, or most of us, let me say that most of us have come to appreciate as wicked problems, because you have complex systems filled with multiple stakeholders, multifaceted issues that you have to try as much as possible to not look at them from one perspective. So today we are going to look at why design thinking is probably a preferred, a good recommendation to start changing the way we tackle some of these issues and how we can go about it. So, this is evidence, if I should put it that way, that this conversation didn't start today, because as Efo went through history, you can realize that humans, we've almost always we've had challenges with our food system. So usually people will say, well, we don't have enough tomatoes, then let's produce more tomatoes for people to have enough of it. But we know that it doesn't end with just production, because as someone rightly mentioned, fuel prices can affect how tomato travels from the farm to the final consumer. Another person talked about road networks and all of that. So clearly, you get the sense that this is also a value chain issue. Then you realize that, well, if you deal with just the tomato value chain, when we get tomatoes, we have to use tomatoes with something else. And so it's not just a single value chain. So it's more or less like a market system where you have to think of all the players in the market. But when you think of market is usually confined. You can't really define markets. You can define markets, but if you want to work on and get details out of it, you have to sort of narrow your focus a bit. So in every sense, some of the approaches that have existed over time are proving to be quite limiting. And that's the reason why it looks as if some of the issues that we've had since, tens of years and decades back are still haunting us today, and probably even getting worse in certain settings of or certain parts of the world. Well, I want us to look at this quote and just take like 15 seconds to let it sink in. It says that convention is always right until new credible data or information enables us to question and shift our perspectives. So, like we've been discussing so far, this problem is not new. We have been working towards it. Probably just think of the number of organizations that exist in the world or in Africa trying to do something around food security. I put this question to ChatGPT and it couldn't give me a number. It just said there are thousands of them. So it means that we are actually doing something, but it could be that we are not changing the way we are looking at this. And probably that's the reason why we are getting the same results over and over. So think about this quote for a moment. And then here's an article to introduce what we want to discuss today, called Innovation Myopia. So basically, this article is saying that when it comes to innovation and the way humans, I mean, everybody's talking about innovation. We have to do things new. We have to do all of that. It looks like when it comes to the subject, we are all for it. But when it comes to the practice of it, the practical side, how we carry out innovation, we seek innovation, but we prefer familiar things. So when we asked what are the things causing some of the headlines that we are seeing in Ghana, some of you said fuel prices, some of you said, post-harvest losses, some of you said poor road networks. The question that we are putting to you is that, are you sure that among all the things that farmers could be facing, these are the most pressing issues, or these are the things that are bringing about the shortages and the high prices that we are talking about? And if we had resources available to solve issues, we should channel those resources to these problems and probably ignore the others. You may not have a definite yes or no, and that's fine. But what this article is prompting us to realize is that usually when people sit together to talk about issues that are happening, to say, what is the problem or what could be the solution, we are thinking of finding something new, but we always lean towards things that we are familiar with, maybe something that the experts have talked about, or something that the market women are saying, or something that the farmers are telling us, or something that we've heard of so over and over and over and over. And we eventually settle on those familiar things instead of actually trying to apply a little bit of what they call empirical evidence to settle on something that is really certain and credible. And I'm happy to, yes, back to our tomato farmer. We'll come back to him. But this is just to illustrate what we were talking about, just trying to, shift the conversation, the practical design thinking in this.
No, no, just go ahead and make it.
I do help mute. Thank you. So, like I was saying, when it comes to issues, even problems, or usually we tend to decide on things. So, um, we are not saying that's what you've done, but it usually happens that you've decided that, okay, fuel prices is what is causing the shortage of tomatoes on the market, or fuel prices is the reason why prices of food are soaring, or transportation. You have decided on it, but the recommendation to help curb innovation myopia is that you have to pause and generate, problems, a list of problems. Just take a deep breath, pause, and look at all the possible problems in the space, and just spend time, to look at, okay, fuel prices, poor road networks, post-harvest losses. If we were to study this farmer that we have in their context and look at how all these three problems are affecting the farmer and the consumers, which of these are affecting them most? Or if you're thinking about a solution, which of these solutions will bring the best impact? Because we also have to have at the back of our minds as innovators that we have limited time and limited resources. So we have to be sure that the problem that we have identified or the solution that we are proposing is what is on top of the list among all the options, and not decide before generating, but to generate before deciding. If you don't take anything out of this session, just remember this, that when it comes to issues, generate before you decide. This is not a classroom, would have repeated it. But yeah, and this is another definition, not another, it's like a rephrased version of our popular definition for design thinking that I really like. Of course, it has the human-centered problem-solving approach, but the part that I really want us to pay attention to is that it is inquiry-led. Where is the highlighter? Annotate, highlighter. Wonderful. So it is inquiry-led actions, and it help us to address uncertainty in the problems that we are trying to solve and the solutions that we imagine. So back to the question that I asked you right now, are you 100% sure that the problems that you said is what is on top of, all the problems that could be causing what we are facing now, or there could be something else? How do you provide yes or no with high confidence? Design thinking, like we have come to appreciate, actually provides practical steps for you to, experiment and test whether the problem that you are seeing is really the problem. That sounded very long. Or the solution is the same. And the way it happens is just these steps that I'm sure we've all seen, hopefully, or if you haven't seen it, if you're a first timer, design thinking basically has steps. The first step is to try and learn from the person that you're trying to solve the problem for. So in this case, it could probably be a tomato farmer. And then you try to dig into the things that they are doing, try and understand their aspirations and motivations and all of that. And that will help you frame the problem. So now you're very sure this is the problem. And then you try to generate as many ideas as possible and pick and test the ideas that you have generated through prototyping in order to, settle on the best to solve the problem that you have identified. So this is like the steps and the framework for it. But in practical sense, all designers are actually working towards problem solution fit. So we have a problem, we are looking for solution. And like I mentioned, you generate before you decide. So we are saying design thinking presents us with experimental tools. So it doesn't happen just in one step. It takes time. So maybe after the first iteration, you go to the farmer, you look at the farmer, study the farmer, talk to the farmer, try and understand things, and you are probably looking at how post-harvest loss is affecting whatever issues at hand. You check, and then you find it. and then you are looking for solutions. You test, and then you try and see if this actually matches. It may not match completely, but you don't stop there. You do another iteration, and then you keep on doing those iterations until you come to a good problem solution fit. We know that in this world, we can't get 100% of everything, but we try to get to the as close to 100% as possible. What does this actually mean? I mean, in practice. So, when you look at how complex food systems are, and for us to be able to actually practice this design thinking framework that we have just talked about, in practice, we are saying that we have to sort of plunge into integrative design thinking. And apologies for using such a complex term, but basically saying that we have to try and tackle this from multiple perspectives, even though we are focusing on the user. And if you look at it, it is very clear because this is on your left, you have, let me go back. On the right side, you have this whole food system. This is what we are, or this is where all of us belong. We are either consumers in the middle, or we are partakers in the production system, or in aggregation or processing, wherever. We can belong to organizations that, make policies, belong to the government. We sort of function somewhere in there. What we are saying is that from an integrative design thinking approach to solving these issues, because remember, we've tried production approach, it really didn't work. We tried value chain approach, it didn't really work. We tried market approach, it didn't really work. Now we are saying, let's try an integrative design approach. And what does that mean? We are saying that, well, like any design thinking approach, let's start with the people at the center. Who are we looking at when it comes to problems? Because more often than not, even when you read some of the reports that big organizations like FAO and World Food Program and all those people publish, the way they capture issues in food system seem very lifeless or very abstract. They'll be like, how do we curb hunger in Africa? Or how do we provide food for people in Africa? How do we do this? How do we do that? They define the problem and leave out the person at the center of it. But integrative design approach is saying that define the problem and bring life to it. So what if we looked at the problem from a tomato farmer whose aspiration is to move from 1 acre to maybe 100 acres next year? Then all of a sudden, issue of providing food for people in Africa has become, how do we get a tomato farmer to move from 1 acre to 100 acres in 1 year? There's life to this problem because there's somebody at the center of it, someone that we can interact with, we can develop something and test with, somebody that we can get feedback from, somebody that we can include in our decision making, in our deliberation, regardless of where you fall in this food system. You understand? So that's the first step when it comes to integrative design. The second one is system perspective. So system perspective, like we would understand this when you go beyond the center, which is where the people involved are, you have so much going on around it. So you cannot just look at how the farmer will move from 1 acre to 100 acres, but you are probably looking at how the inputs will come, how the processing or storage will come, how the transportation from farm and other places will come. And to be able to do this effectively, integrative design is actually highly recommending. It's nothing new in the way design thinking is practiced, but in this case, highly, highly recommending that we build interdisciplinary teams and try to include stakeholders as part of the core design team, but not treating them or engaging them at arm's length. So if, let's say, we were to, what happened in Ghana, planting for food and jobs, I don't have all the facts, but this is just hypothetical situation. We can look into it when we get a chance. Imagine the people who came up with the program and think of whether or not they had the final beneficiaries in mind, in the sense that they included those final beneficiaries in the setup of the program. They tested and iterated through simulations or prototypes of the program to see whether this will be successful from the start of it and whether it will be scalable over time and all of that. I can't say for sure that it happened, but we cannot also deny that it might not have happened. But the whole point of the discussion is that we build interdisciplinary teams and have people who handle various aspects of this food system work together closely. What happens is that it helps to maintain something called consistency in the language of what we are doing. So the one who is in charge of transportation when it comes to the food system understand what we are trying to achieve from day one. They see things from the farmer's perspective, so they know how to tailor their services to benefit the farmer. The farmer also understands how it should, frame things, or how it should set its farm up in order to meet the demands of the one transporting, same for the one harvesting, same for the one storing, same for the distributor, and also the consumer, because we are doing this with the consumer at the center of it. So this is highly, highly recommended. And like I was saying, there's also strategy alignment, because everybody who is involved, we are all working together. We understand the language and the focus of what we are trying to do. So planting for food and jobs, everybody from top to the bottom would understand what we are trying to do. If from the policy perspective, we will understand the details of it, and we are all contributing to it because we have been engaged. We've done simulations of it. We've given feedback, and we understand what this is where this is heading, and we'll be able to contribute to the success of it. And then the most important thing, that it has to be equity driven, because like I mentioned, and we saw in the article, part of the world right now has food going waste, but part of the world is facing acute hunger. And it's because some of the systems that we have, these big organizations and NGOs and all these people are thinking of, usually doesn't ask the question, who are we leaving out? When we are introducing a policy, or we are introducing a program, or even at the local level. So someone like Daniel, I'm sure when we get to the discussion part, you can tell us some of the things that you've done so far. When you're introducing a program, do you ask yourself, in the community or the space where you're operating, are you leaving somebody out? Somebody that ordinarily shouldn't be left out, so that we are only talking about food insecurity or having issues with our food system because part of the people that we should have included in the programs that we started with about 10 years ago were actually left out. So integrated design thinking highly recommends that we ask this question from the onset. Eventually, this is what a sustainable food system looks like. And I should have added that image. But when you look at it, this is very similar to what we call the three-legged stool, where we have viability, feasibility, and desirability. Thank you.
we can hear you.
You guys can still hear me. Thank you. Yes. So eventually, this is what a sustainable food system looks like. At the middle of it is where we can say innovation has really happened. But we have to think of the economic side of it, which, I mean, can be related to the viability. We also have to think of how feasible this thing is, who is going to do it. Is it really acceptable in our context? Is this something that we can embrace? The environmental impact of it and all of it. So from everything that we are talking about, what we are saying is that, number one, we have to, when we are looking at food system, it is not a conversation that started now. It's something that has persisted. And it's not like we haven't done anything. We have been doing a lot. Just like I said, just think of the number of organizations in the world that are trying to do something to, contribute to that the SDG goal, zero hunger, and look at the vast number of resources that have gone into this. But if we keep on hearing that our food systems are not improving per se, but a lot more people are going hungry because there are things that we can't control or things that we haven't been able to solve, then it begs the question of what we have to do differently. And we are saying that design thinking as a creative problem solving tool is saying probably we should start, thinking, finding ways that we can shift our perspective and move away from the convention. And basically, like I said, you generate before you decide. Back to the first question that we were talking about. After everything that you have heard, how do you think we can generate before we decide in order to help our dear farmer? Let me put him on the screen. Yes. In order to help our farmers, our consumers, and everybody in the food system, the floor is open. How can we bring design thinking into wherever we are? Because remember, food system, it covers everybody. So wherever you are, how can you start implementing design thinking by how can you implement design thinking in order to help create sustainable food systems as we saw? So yes, Daniel, I think I would want to start the conversation with you because you are at the center of it all. You have been practicing this.
Okay, thank you, sir, for the presentation. So, with the knowledge of the presentation, going forward, I think whatever I've been doing, I normally involve the farmers and the processors. As I said, the current problem mango farmers are having in Broome East is how to get access to market during bumper season. So over the years, what I've done is to how to get funding, and I've gotten some funding. I try to integrate farmer level value addition. It didn't work because the farmers are overwhelmed with activities on the farm. Then currently I'm trying to also introducing marketing as a way to absorb most of the produce, and we've gotten funding for KNUST processing factory. They are looking at drying mangoes into chips. So that's what I've been doing, and with design thinking, and I don't think in what I do I use the process, but we normally, because of our experience in the value chain, we normally engage the farmers and the processors, understand their problem before we design project and solicit for funding. That's what I've been doing since 2016.
Right.
Thank you.
So, Vincent, please go ahead. Thank you, Daniel.
You're welcome.
Oh, thank you for giving me the floor. I just wanted to kind of chime in on what Daniel was saying about funding, right? And so on state side, what we have seen in the United States is that government has been allocating resources for photovoltaics. So these are renewable energy solar panels built for the farms so that the farmers can actually raise capital by allowing these photovoltaics to be placed on the farms and generate energy. And then in that, the government is also subsidizing the infrastructure for that, which gives farmers 2/3 of their revenue in a matter of months, what would take 1 to 2 years. And so that allows farmers to pay off whatever debts they may have, or it allows them to purchase more equipment, more seeds or other resources that's needed to sustain the farm in the long term. And I think that may be something that farmers could be looking at to generate more revenue in the short term and the long term, so that they're not actually going to a bank or going to a third party to try to raise capital that they don't necessarily have the ability to pay off in the long term.
Right. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. So, Daniel, I don't know if you have anything that you are picking from my contribution, something that you think could be helpful since you are trying to raise funds. And then I have a question that I will put out to everybody. Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, so as he's saying, over here in Ghana, agriculture is donor funded instead of the government funding. Government provides some funding. So here, the approach will be different. Yeah, the approach will be different because it's donor funded. It's foreigners who are trying to support the farmers in so many ways. So that's what I would say.
Right. So, what I'm thinking of is that Daniel has presented us with a very great opportunity because we sort of have a real case study to try and put what we have discussed to action. So from what he said, basically, he works with farmers and try to develop programs that will help farmers, essentially. And sometimes some of the programs work for the farmers, sometimes they don't work. But at the moment, he's looking at how to help farmers deal with post-harvest loss during mango seasons. So this is a perfect case study. I want to open this up for anybody to chime in. How do you think we can go in by the issue of integrative design thinking, or the recommendations that integrative design thinking is putting forward? How do you think we can help Daniel better serve the farmers that he's working with? Because eventually, I'm sure if you're able to help Daniel, then we are contributing to sustainable food system. So, practical case study, the floor is open.
Sure, Derry. Thanks for the mic, passing the mic to me. I think where my mind space is at currently is what you just took us through in terms of decision and generating, right? Because I think most of the people on the call probably have some stake in the food value chain, as well as like Daniel and the other colleagues. And so I think one of the things that is very common with people who are experts in the field is, deciding, is the expertise bias, right? And so usually we tend to be quick to decide what the actual problem is. And with this problem of post-harvest losses, etc., with connecting the farmers to a ready market, etc., I think usually, and you don't even see it happening, but people are quickly, subconsciously decide what they think the problem is, and therefore all actions sort of geared towards solving what we think. So just putting in perspective what you just took us through, I think it calls for we, stepping 2-3 steps backwards to really generate what the problems are, what tops it, what makes the top list, and channel our energies, attention, expertise, knowledge, etc., to systematically, as you called out, addressing the top list, the generated problems, and not focusing so much on what we have decided the problem is. And I mean, from the design thinking, mindset and core practices, this will take a lot of humility to actually accept that we don't know what we don't know, and we, even though we are experts in the field, be open to something that might surprise us through, I like the definition that you shared with us, being curious enough to find out what really the problem is and then tackling it from that perspective. So I think that's where my mind is at, and this is really a brilliant way to look at all of the existing problems, because I think we are really quick to call out or decide what we think the problems are, but really, being sure that the problem that we have decided is the problem is actually the problem, and then solving it in a systematic way is really the design thinking approach. So that's where my mind is at right now, and particularly as well you honing in on the people at the center. And it's no coincidence that the graphics that you showed us actually put people at the center of the problem, right? And so usually we disconnect. We say a farmer, we say someone somewhere, and as you mentioned, it's very lifeless. But if you put somebody at the core of the problem and channel our creative juices towards solving for someone, I think that might help us generate more solutions at the other side of the double diamond that you showed us. So yeah, pretty much really, really thoughtful conversation. And I like that, you took us through it's from the design thinking perspective. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kofi. I really, really appreciate your contribution. I don't know if I'm mentioning the name right. Is it Sean Olatunji?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much for the wonderful presentation. And thanks, Kofi, for sharing that perspective you got putting the farmers at the center, of the conversation itself, because most of the time, what we think is the problem may not actually be the problem. And that's one of the things that design thinking helps us to achieve. So why don't we, involve the farmers directly and try to, validate some of the assumptions that has been shared in this call. So I'm joining from Nigeria, right? And the reason why I joined this, call is because currently in Nigeria we are facing shortage of tomatoes and peppers. So and at the moment it's really expensive. So and just from my own assumption, two major things may have caused this issue, because this pepper production, tomatoes, do come from the northern part of Nigeria mostly. Meanwhile, even from the western part of Nigeria, they have we have the farmland. We can also plant here, but the farming activities in the western part of Nigeria has reduced drastically, because most of the people have, left agriculture to embrace other form of professions. Meanwhile, the northern part of Nigeria that they really embrace agriculture, they are currently facing insecurity, which is, even though something that I couldn't find in the system diagram that was drawn. So, like, insecurity is a major factor for them there that has actually affected farming or agricultural activities. So most of the farmers and herdsmen, they do have a lot of clashes that has, led to loss of lives, and for these farmers has abandoned their farmlands, and another major issue for them there is, earlier this year there was this heat wave, that happened, which I'm sure may have led to drought also in that area. So at the top of my head now, I could be thinking, okay, if you're looking at sustainable farm system, so how can we introduce sustainability kind of production for these people, so that at least probably something like in the area of maybe vertical farming, for instance, where they will not need to come outdoor to farmland. Maybe they could now be, practicing this farming within closed doors, so that that will maybe avoid clash with its herdsmen and reduce, maybe insecurity in that aspect. But at the same time, if we're looking at sustainable farming, I will still encourage the fact that we get to involve the farmers directly and see how this approach could even work effectively, and try to reframe the problem appropriately. And there's no how we can do that without actually involving them directly. And like for instance, now in the western part of Nigeria, where there is no much of insecurity. So another question there could be, okay, why is it that people are not no longer embracing agricultural practices like farming like that the way it was before, maybe like in the 18th century, 20th century, before now. I think that's also something that we could also try to define and try to understand why and create a solution around that as well. That there was a particular business that I saw recently in Nigeria here. So they turn waste into uh, compost, like fertilizer, and they are encouraging bag farming where you just put the waste into like small bags, and you can just you can start farming even indoors, and which I feel it's actually a very nice idea. So these are some ideas that could be tested, but in order to test them, I still feel we need to go in the direction of what Kofi said. So thank you so much for this presentation.
Thank you, Sean. And I don't know, vice versa, but a wonderful contribution from your end. Because of time, let's see if we can hear from Mohammed. Sorry, we can. Is it Valentine? My mentioning the name right? Valentine first, then we go to Mohammed, and then we will end.
Yeah. Yes. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Emmanuel, for the wonderful presentation. Just a quick one to add to what Kofi said. When Daniel was making his submission, he quickly mentioned that they tried to get farmer-based solutions for the post-harvest losses, but it didn't work. And so they are now focusing their attention on finding market channels for their produce. I think he has quickly rubbished that thing, that problem quickly. When you want to consider what Kofi said, if you are thinking in that mindset, looking at the farmers as the center of this situation, I don't think a farmer would see his mangoes rotting and say, I am very engaged in other activities on the farm, so I'll allow my fruits to go waste. Probably they tried adding value to it, but after adding the value, where to get the market for it doesn't really encourage them to do that. I'm speaking from experience because some NGO was involved in training farmers on how to produce mango jam from mangoes. And after producing the mango jam, there's not really a huge market for mango jam in Ghana. So they ended up getting discouraged in using that skill. And so, Daniel, I would wish you really look at that situation, the farmer-based solution to the post-harvest losses again, and then this time around make the farmer the center of your focus. And just a quick one too, I joined in a bit late, but I saw that you were speaking about the hunger issue in Ghana, and you are speaking about the tomato production or the cost of tomatoes in Ghana. Those of you who have been operating in the supply chain of Ghana for some few years now, you realize that the vegetable supply in Ghana shifts from one region to the other, depending on the time of the year. And so usually from January to May, the supply is mostly coming from the northern part of Ghana. And for some few years now, I think climate change has really been an issue. It's giving the farmers a lot of challenges in terms of production. They are willing to do, but the fruits don't fruit because the temperatures are too high for the pepper and then tomatoes to flower. When they start budding, they fall off. So it's not necessarily a post-harvest issue. So they have a very short window to churn out a lot of tomatoes, and at the end of the day, they don't get market for it, and then they get the spoilages. But some few years back, I remember some NGOs who came in again to teach these farmers to turn these tomatoes into tomato puree. But Ghanaians prefer fresh tomatoes or tin tomatoes. They have a taste for those varieties of tomatoes. So they ended up doing a lot of tomato puree that was stuck in their warehouses and they weren't getting really huge markets for it. So, I mean, when we are thinking of the supply chain, we should put the farmers again at the center of the discussion, because they actually know what the problems are, because nobody else feels the pain as much as they when they get their fruits rotting in the farm. So, I mean, when we are looking for solutions, it's very good to go to this focus on the people who stand at the who has higher stakes in it. Thank you, Emmanuel.
Thank you so much, Valentine. I will take Mohammed's contribution, and then we will try and wrap it up.
Good evening to you all. Thank you again for the presentation, Daniel, and your co-hostess, plus my other colleagues who also contribute. So actually, I have a problem with our agricultural system in the country, because actually I've joined a lot of programs, educative programs on agriculture and how sustainable our agri can be. And we always come out with solutions, but it seems it doesn't go anywhere. We don't see any solution, no outcome. For instance, we always complain of post-harvest losses, and we complain of price fluctuation, but we don't consider the fact that all our farmlands are being taken away, especially in the cities. I'm in Ghana, so probably pardon me to speak for what I know. So in the cities, you hardly find farmers. People farm on pieces of land, and even those farming on pieces of lands are being taken away actually. And we all know that this irrigation, we have at least a bit irrigation or small irrigation in the cities and not at all in the villages. And yet more of our food comes from these villages. So if these villages are farming based on the season, how are we expecting to stabilize our prices in the country? Moreover, we don't have any food preservation facilities. We don't have anything like of such sort in the country. How are we going to solve our problems? Or we are always going to state the problems, keep stating the problems without a solution. Who is actually who is actually on this platform to hear? Who is working on it? The farmers are not here. We are all theoretical people and probably some few other farmers. So we are not actually getting the main thing on the field. My other colleagues has mentioned this so much, and I also touch on it. Such programs, we need like the field work. We need people with experience who has, even though I'm in the system myself, but actually I am in the city, and also I've not been in it for too long, so probably the experience is low. So thank you very much, and this is all I've got to say for now. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Mohammed. I wish we could take more, but we'd have to wrap it up here. I just want to sort of put all the comments together and tie to everything that has been discussed, especially since we are using Daniel as a case study tied to that. So from what Sean mentioned, I moved to this slide, and I think another person touched on that you don't have to give up on the first idea that you started with. Something could come out of it. And usually, like Kofi mentioned, the beauty of design thinking is that you have to really humble yourself and be patient to test things out to the last mile. So instead of doing this at a full scale, maybe you could have probably started with a few farmers to see how this thing works, because that would allow you to, not commit so much resources to it, but help you discover a lot more insights about how this thing could possibly work or what variations of it cannot work. So we highly recommend that you don't give it up, but you try and do some simulations with a few farmers. And even with what you have started now, just try and do a bit of what we call prototyping. You're not building the whole thing, but just a miniature version of it and testing it out. And as you can see on the screen, the problem solution fit doesn't really happen at once. It's a very iterative process that you have to, keep on practicing and testing till you get to the last mile. To the point of Mohammed, you're very right, because I don't think I know myself to be a farmer. I'm not sure if my co-host also does farming. Design thinking as a consulting a company, I don't think we are into farming. But the beauty of this is that we are able to engage people like you who is already in the system, someone like Daniel, and share with them some of the things that we believe they can practice in order to enhance what they are doing. And hopefully when we get the chance, we can do more. So I would advise and really recommend that whatever the discussion we've started here, hopefully you can carry on the discussion and share with your friends and the other people who are in the system with you, for us to, continue on adding to the efforts. We can't stop because we are not succeeding now. We just have to continue. So as we promised, we want to end this with some advocacy. I think some of you have already mentioned it. Sean said that right now they can't get pepper and tomatoes and other things. I chanced on this recently, and I was very enthused about it. So because tomatoes are not in season, or because we are not getting tomatoes, people have creatively started looking at what watermelons can do. And it actually is true, because if we mentioned it in the history of food systems, that one of the challenges that we are facing right now is that our food system are kind of just one way. So if we don't have yam, it looks like the whole world has come to an end. But it could be that with the knowledge and research and all the things that we have right now, it doesn't mean we can't look into other sources of food that we probably have access to, so that if tomatoes are not in season and watermelons are in season now, we can just switch and life will just move on. So the advocacy is that as creative as we all are, we can be very creative in our various kitchens, or for people that cook for us. We should try and test things out, try new recipes. That's very basic. That's all that we are saying. And this is also something that happens. This is an actual company goes to, so if, let's say, a typical example, for instance, if ShopRite rejects carrots and other things because they are not looking very nice, this company picks it up and then sells it to other people who need it. And what the lesson that I want to share from this is that, we can also try and change where we are sourcing things from, all the way to where we buy them, all the way to trying to plant things for ourselves. Because if we change that, then it means we are sort of shortening the supply chain, so that if food is not coming from the north, like Sean mentioned, probably we can have something in the south or in the west and we'll be fine, and not just rely on that long supply chain, and things will move on. So these are just some advocacies things that we are advocating for and hoping that we'll be able to practice. On behalf of A4 and I, we want to say a big thank you. Well, I don't know if we have time for questions and comments, but I'm sure the discussions that we've had so far is good. Of course, I'm sure you can also send more questions in the chat, and then if possible, we can even send you an email to reply that. But thank you so much for your time, for spending your evening with us. I'll pass. I don't know if you have any final comments, but if not, I'll pass it on to Matt, our moderator.
Just want to say a big thank you to everyone for coming and contributing. It's definitely food for thoughts that we've discussed here, and hopefully we'll carry on and keep the discussion alive, and probably look into more discussions that can further the development of food systems. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much, Derry, and then Ofwa. It's been an interesting conversation, and I've read a couple of comments in the chat, and really, really great conversations. Derry's final comments. You made an important comment stating that, of course, we come here and then we talked about it in response to one of the concerns that one of the participants raised. There's this saying that the more we talk about it, the more it goes out there. So as we talk about these things over here in our day-to-day activities, you're talking to a friend, you never know, just have these discussions, and before you realize it will get to the the very farmer you want this information to get to, you will get to the policymakers, and then they can make policies in order to make things work for us. So once again, thank you very much for joining us. I don't know if Dr. Gordon is still here with us, if he has some final thoughts before I bring the meeting to a close.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. No, I think it's been great. I was saying in the chat that I think this presentation has opened our minds. I was really struck by this idea that we should probably take a step back. The way I understand it is name your bias, right? If you see something one way, name the bias, name it as a bias, and then stop and ask yourself, what if I'm seeing it wrong? What if I could see it another way? And I think it came through very well. We really do need to rethink the way we approach food production, because we really, really do not need to be importing as much food as we do. So let's keep the conversation going. As you said, if we keep talking about it, one day somebody will wake up and do so. Well, we will keep it in mind, but then and hopefully act on it. But then other people may also take action. So thank you, Derry. Thank you, Matt.
Right. Thank you, Prof, for that summary. And once again, I want to say thank you very much for joining us. And next month, we will have another topic scheduled. And as I always say, we apply design thinking in every facet of life, every industry. So we'll keep on having these discussions. Hopefully, in the coming weeks, you would have, or you get details of the next meetup, the date and all that, so you can join us again. And by close of day tomorrow, would have this video or this recording posted, so you can always go back to it if there's something you need to catch up on the discussions of today. Thank you all once again, and have a good evening.